You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast. I am your host, Rhonda. Today we are doing the next installment of our series, the Moynihan, based on the Moynihan report, the decline and destruction of the Black family. So if you have not joined us for this series, if this is your first time, I highly recommend that you go back through to the other episodes. In this series, we are literally speaking on using the data from the Census Bureau from 1940 all the way up until 1963. Okay. And some pretty powerful stuff in that. We're on part 4. I'll just go into real quick where we're at, and we'll get started here. Okay, just a second. Okay. All right. So this is the case for national action, the Negro family. And this data was put together by the U.S. Department of Labor, but Office of Policy Planning and Research. It was published in 1963, but the data spans from 1940 to 1963. All right, so just to give you a high-level recap of what we went over in the other 3 episodes, we talked about marriages. So within the Black community, during that time frame, the 1940s up until 1963, what did marriages look like? And they even got down to breaking the data down from living in the city, living in the suburbs, and living in the country. And then they further got into looking at birth rates. So how many of the births were with mother and father being married, how many were not. That data is, well, all of it, family, because what you're going to see, and, if you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes, I highly encourage you to go back to listen to it. But you're going to see that although the marriages were higher, the marriage rates were higher over that time frame, and of course, when you get to the 40s, of course, it's really high. And then as time went on, the marriage rates declined. But even when the marriage rates were high, what you're going to find is that there were a lot of desertion. So meaning even though you are married on paper, the father abandoned or walked out of the household. Okay, so in essence, still made that mother a single mom. Okay, and then of course they get into what they're calling illegitimate. Back in the day, if you had a child out of wedlock, they called that child illegitimate. Okay, so single, they're going to get into single parent households. And then now remember, this was back in 63. They gathered the data about how Black families, Black women headed families as a single mother. Okay. Now we should know, fast forward today, that number has grown tremendously. It's at 70% now. Okay. And then they talked about the dependency of the Black family on welfare. This should be very, very eye-opening because in the Black community, I still hear an argument, an invalid argument about welfare taking the Black man out of the home. That is not the case. We have the data to prove that is not the case. Okay, so that's what we've gone over so far. And then we get into city life. We get into unemployment and poverty and the wage system. And with unemployment and poverty, they also were able to compare that with the number of children that a family is having. And when they get into the wage system, they're also able to compare that with the number of children being birthed and a direct link to poverty. Okay. And then just to compound the issue of a father being absent from the family structure. Okay. And so then as you see in the next section, they talked about that the problem is growing. And they show you that over time from the 1940s all the way up until 63. And we know today these numbers are even higher. And we will do a follow-up statistics, bringing it more up to date. After we wrap up this series, I will do a follow-up because I am still in shock to know this data goes back as far as the 40s and the same exact problems that are seen today in the Black community still exist. This has been very, very difficult for me to get through, but it is the reality of things. Okay. All right. And then we also went over via this report, which this was another one. Ooh. The matriarch, and it pretty much breaks down how the Black families always had a structure of the matriarch, and it is not going to be in a positive light because it is the matriarch is born in the Black community and Black families out of necessity and survival based on the absence of the man. So in other words, a matriarch structure being driven in the Black community based on survival and based on that matriarch and the children trying to survive on limited resources, okay, in a patriarch society. So I found that absolutely just, it's a lot, family, to take into account. And then the other one, they got into how the youth, out of all that they have given the statistics on the absentee fathers, the unemployment, growing up in dependent on a system of welfare, single parent, single mother household, how it impacts the youth. And there's no mistake about it. The stats were very, very clear on the impact of youth. So this time we're going to pick back up on the delinquency and crime. Okay, so let's go to page 38 of the report. Okay. All righty. Let's start here. Make sure this is 38. That's 35. It's 36. It's always a little off. Apologize. I don't know why it's always off when you do that. So this is 38. Okay. Delinquency and crime. The combined impact of poverty, failure, and isolation among Negro youth has had the predictable outcome in a disastrous delinquency and crime rate. In a typical pattern of discrimination, Negro children in all public and private orphanages are a smaller proportion of all children than their proportion of population, although their needs are clearly greater. Okay, so I found that extremely interesting because it's not a lot of Black children. Remember, this data is from 1940s to 1963. So back then, there were not a lot of children in what they're calling orphanages, and today they're called foster care or wards of the state. Okay, that's what they call it today. There were less Black children in their system, and they're basing that on population size because, according to them, there's less Black people in America than white people. But even with the smaller Black children being the smaller group being in the orphanage system, their needs are much greater. Okay. All right. On the other hand, Negro or Blacks, I'm going to say Blacks, and you may hear me interchange it if I forget. So on the other hand, Blacks represent a third of all youth in training schools for juvenile delinquencies. Children in homes for dependent and neglected children. This is 1960. Okay, and that backs up what they were saying above. White, 64,000, which is 88%. Black, 6,100, which is 8%. This one they did decide to break down by different races. All other races, 2,300, which is 3%. And then all races, they're just giving the overall number. So it was 73,000 children that were in juvenile delinquency training schools. Okay. So it is probable that at present, a majority of the crimes against the persons, such as the R word, taking someone's life, and aggravated assault are committed by Blacks. There is, of course, no absolute evidence. Inference can only be made from arrest and prison population statistics. The data that follow unquestionably are biased against Blacks, who are arraigned much more casually than are whites, but it may be doubted that the bias is greater enough to affect the general proportion. So in other words, they're saying that the most crimes committed, and we're going to go back down to they're giving the specifics of the crime, the R word, taking someone's life, and aggravated assault. And they're basing that on total population numbers. Okay. So, and then they're also still just keeping in mind that they do have to take into account that Blacks get arrested more than whites. Okay, overall. And that could be, not could be, there are based on biases, or you could say racism, but even with factoring in those things, it still has Black crime against others the highest, right? So I hope that made sense. Number of arrests in 1963, offenses charged total. I'm just going to start rounding these numbers up. For whites, 32,000. For Blacks, 39,000. Okay, so, all right, and then I'll just keep going. Murder and non-negligence manslaughter, 2,300 whites, blacks 3,000. Forcible R, 4,400 whites, 4,000 blacks. Aggravated assault, 25,000 whites, 32,000 black. Okay, so those are the numbers just based on 1963. So if blacks are the smaller population, that backs up what they were saying up above. So meaning blacks do commit more. Now remember this is in 1963. More of the crime. Okay? Because remember, supposed to be the smallest of the population. But even if you look at these numbers, they are higher for blacks. The only exception is forcible R, but that's only by a hair. Only by a slight amount. Okay? Now, I'm sure they didn't track it in this report, but you can break this down by gender, and we're all can pretty much assume, based on history, that most of this is based on the male population, white and black. Right? So again, on the urban frontier, the ratio is worse. 3 out of every 5 arrests for these crimes were Negro. In Chicago in 1963, 3/4 of the persons arrested for such crimes were Negro. In Detroit, the same proportions held. In 1960, 37% of all persons in federal and state prison were black. In that year, 56% of the homicide and 57% of the assault offenders committed to state institutions were black. Okay, so they're going to go into the number of city arrests in 1963. Offenses charged total for white, I'm going to round up again, 25,000. For blacks, 36,000. Murder and non-negligent manslaughter, 1,700 for whites, 2,600 for blacks. Forcible R, 3,200 for whites, 3,600 for black. Aggravated assault, 20,000 for white, 30,000 for black. Right? The overwhelming number of offenses committed by blacks are directed towards other blacks. I am going to say that again. It's not me saying it. This is what the data is saying. So all of those stats that we were reading above, with black crime being the highest, the overwhelming number of offenses committed by blacks are directed towards other blacks. The cost of crime to the black community is a combination of that to the criminal and to the victim. Now, fast forward 50 plus years, and this is the exact same issue that we see in the black communities, in the urban cities. The exact same issue that we see. And the interesting thing is, when you try to have this conversation with the black collective, it literally becomes cognitive dissonance. I have literally had people tell me, when I try to have this conversation, every time there's a new national campaign regarding police violence against a black man, And I said, okay, I totally understand that, but where is the same outrage when this violence happens every day within Black communities against each other? Literally, folks either get irate, either say you're off topic, or totally cognitive dissonance. That's what we're dealing with today. 50 plus years later from when this data, these statistics were published, was the same problem then. But let's continue. Some of the research on the effects of broken homes and on delinquent behavior recently surveyed by Thomas F. Pettigrew in a profile of the Negro American is summarized below, along with several other studies of the question. Mary Diggs found that 3/4, twice the expected ratio of Philadelphia's Black delinquencies who came before the law during 1948 did not live with both of their natural parents. Now remember these dates. In predicting juvenile crime, Eleanor and Sheldon Gluck also found that a higher proportion of delinquent than non-delinquent boys came from broken homes. They identified 5 critical factors in the home environment that made a difference in whether boys would become delinquents. Discipline of boy by father, supervision of boy by mother, affection of father for boy, affection of mother for boy, and cohesiveness of family. So I'm just going to go over that again. And remember, they're going over a higher proportion of delinquents than non-delinquent boys came from broken homes. Here are the 5 factors, the critical 5 factors in the home environment that made a difference on whether or not boys would become delinquents. Discipline of boy by father, supervision of boy by mother, affection of father for boy, affection of mother for boy, and cohesiveness of family. So again, if we go back to the root issues that we are seeing with the Black family being in shambles or destroyed, I'm going to say this slow because this is very, 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 very important. We should no longer be bringing out excuses of welfare or any other outside influence. The data is telling you what the root issues are. Now remember, this data is from 1940 to 1963. These are the exact same issues that are plaguing the Black collective community. So here are the 5 critical factors. Discipline of boy by father. Would that not mean that the father either needs to be in the home and actively involved, or if he is not in the home, be actively involved in his children's lives? And specifically, the data overwhelmingly shows that Black boys need their fathers. Supervision of boy by mother, which means the mother would have to be available in order to supervise her children. She cannot be available to supervise her children if she is working. And especially if she is working more than one job. Affection of father for boy. So that would mean not only it's deeper than just being in the home. Because if you're in the home and you're still not providing a healthy, affectionate relationship with your children, and in this case, they're saying with a boy, and this is in the case of the father, what difference does it make? They're still going to fall into delinquency. So let me just back that up and make that real clear. Affection of father for boy. That means that Black men have to have a healthy mental psyche, and that's whether they're in the home or not in the home, to provide affection. I'm going to say for the children, but in this case, they're saying for the boy. Affection of mother for boy. Same difference, only difference is the mother, by default, are raising children, and she's raising them on her own, but she also has to have a healthy mental psyche to pass affection on, healthy affection on to her children. But in this case that they're speaking of, to the boy. In order for the mother, a big factor of the mother being in her right healthy state of mind is she needs resources. She cannot carry on her back the entire family of being the provider and the protector and the nurturer, and then have a healthy psyche to be affectionate, or that nurturer side, okay? That puts an unprecedented burden on the mother to play all of those roles, to be the provider, to be the protector, and then the nurturer, okay? Not saying that it can't be done. What the data is showing that it should not be done because of the devastation that is occurring between Black families. And the cohesiveness of the family. So they are telling you that you need a healthy father, you need a healthy mother. From a mental state, physical state, the father must actively play his part. Build, provide, protect. The mother must play her part. She is the nurturer. She also educates the children. She also creates that loving home environment. That is a family unit. Okay? And even if the father is not in the home, he still is responsible for providing and protecting and providing affection towards his children. That is the cohesiveness of family, right? So let's continue. Okay, but I just want to reiterate again, there should be no discussion on what happened to the Black family. We already know the reasons why. It has been studied. The data shows you what the reasons are. And I'm certainly not hearing these specific reasons as a Black collective. I hear other outside influences. But let's continue. In 1952, when the New York City Youth Board set out to test the validity of these 5 factors as predictors of delinquency, a problem quickly emerged. The Gluck sample consisted of white boys and mainly Irish, Italian, Lithuanian, and English descent. I'm still tripping. Lithuanian? Okay, a lot of Lithuanians back up in the 50s. Okay, well, whatever. However, the youth board group was 44% Negro and 14% Puerto Rican, and the frequency of broken homes within these groups was out of proportion to the total number of delinquencies in the population. In the majority of these cases, the father was usually never in the home at all, absent for the major proportion of the boy's life, or was present only on occasion. The final prediction table was reduced to 3 factors: supervision of boy by mother, discipline of boy by mother, and family cohesiveness within what family, in fact, existed, but was nonetheless 85% accurate in predicting delinquencies and 96% accurate in predicting non-delinquencies. So in other words, once they start to study delinquency rates based on these 5 factors, discipline of boy by father, supervision of boy by mother, affection of father for boy, affection of mother for boy, and cohesiveness of the family. So they get into tracking with or doing a case study. They had to reduce the 5 to 3 because of what? Because Black fathers weren't in the household, because Black fathers were not actively involved in their child's life. So they had to reduce the 5 factors down to the 3. And the reduction came from they had to exclude the Black fathers because they weren't there. So then that made the study only focus on what the mother's impact would be in delinquency. So let's fast forward 50-something years later, when we hear some say in the Black community that it is the fault of the single mother, that it is the fault of the woman, of the delinquency of the children. Do we understand what we're really saying? So the entire burden on the welfare of a child is placed on the mother, but yet we want to cognitively ignore the absence of the father in that outcome. Let me roll that back and repeat. So as we're having the conversation of the fault of delinquencies within the Black community and placing that blame on mothers, and specifically single mothers, we want to cognitively ignore or exclude the lack of presence of the Black father, which, based on these statistics, it's really the root cause, the absentee of a Black father in the home or participating actively in his children's life, are the root cause of the destruction and the plight of the Black family. See, if we're going to have these discussions in the collective Black community, they need to be had honestly, not with opinions, not with, well, my individual situation. They need to be had honestly, and the only way to do that, pull the data. Pull the data. That's if we really, truly, honestly, from the depth of our soul, want to correct the ills of the Black community and the Black family. They're one in the same. I have said that for years. Okay, researchers who have focused upon the good boy in high delinquency neighborhoods noted that they typically come from exceptionally stable, intact families. Recent psychological research demonstrates the personality effects of being reared in a disorganized home without a father. One study showed that children from fatherless homes seek immediate gratification of their desires far more than children with fathers present. Others reveal that children who hunger for immediate gratification are more prone to delinquency, along with other less social behavior. Two psychologists, Pedigree says, maintain that the inability to delay gratification is a critical factor in immature, criminal, and neurotic behavior. Finally, let me just stop for a second. Now, I don't know these young men's background. This literally just happened earlier this week. It was brought to the public. Now, I don't know these young men, Black men's background, and whether or not they had a father present in their life, whether or not he was in the home, or whether or not his father was actively participating in his life. But here's the point that I'm trying to make with this regarding delaying gratification. There were NBA players, former NBA players, that got busted, that got busted defrauding the NBA's medical system. So they were submitting false claims and getting reimbursed. Now, did you hear what I said? I said former NBA players. So meaning, would that not at a minimum, they are upper middle class? At a minimum. So I say that to say, why would someone who was able to play in the NBA revert to that type of crime, to that type of criminal behavior? Okay. Now, again, I don't know whether or not any of those men, fathers, were in their lives with single parenthood in the Black community being 70%. The likelihood that they did not have that influence, that Black male influence, is pretty high. So I reckon that to delayed gratification. We're talking men that at a minimum were upper middle class, if not at least a millionaire, defrauding the medical system. Let's continue. Finally, Pettigrew discussed the evidence that a stable home is a critical factor in counteracting the effect of racism upon Negro personality. A warm, supportive home can effectively compensate for many of the restrictions the Negro child faces outside the ghetto. Consequently, the type of home life a Negro enjoys as a child may be far more critical for governing the influence of segregation upon his personality than the form the segregation takes, legal or informal, Southern or Northern. Okay? Now, of course, we know that racism and discrimination has an impact. No one is questioning that whatsoever. But that impact is smaller than the impact of how your family upbringing. So let me say that again, because this is an important point. No one is saying that discrimination and racism are not factors in the ills of Black folk. No one is saying that. Absolutely, we know that it is. But if you want to stack racism and discrimination up against the way you were raised or having a healthy family, the impact of the way you were raised and having a healthy family far outweighs racism and discrimination. So what that means is using the argument, Black collective, what that means is using the argument that racism and discrimination are the sole factor of the destruction of the Black community. It's not accurate. It's not accurate. So again, meaning the destruction of the Black community, the destruction of Black families, is based on the family dynamics. And once you get into specifically the family dynamics and the root cause, it is the absentee of the Black father. Let's continue. A Yale University study of youth in the lowest socioeconomic class in New Haven in 1950, whose behavior was followed through their 18th year, revealed that among the delinquents in the group, 38% came from broken homes, compared with 24% of non-delinquents. The President's Task Force on Manpower Conservation in 1963 found that of young men rejected for the draft for failure to pass the mental test, 42% of those with a court record came from broken homes, compared with 30% of those without a court record. Half of all the Black rejectees in the study with a court record came from broken homes. An examination of the family background of 44,000 delinquency cases in Philadelphia between 1949 and 1954 documents the frequency of broken homes among delinquents. 62% of the Negro delinquents and 36% of white delinquents were not living with both parents. 62% of black boys getting in trouble early. So that's that preteen, teenage years. 62% of them came from broken homes. So meaning the father was not in their life. Remember, this is between 1949 and 1954. In 1950, 33% of black children and 7% white children in Philadelphia were living in homes with both parents. Repeaters were even more likely to be from broken homes than first offenders. The armed forces. The ultimate mark of inadequate preparation for life is the failure to rate on the armed forces mental test. Whew. The armed forces qualification test is not quite a mental test, nor yet an education test. It is a test of ability to perform at an acceptable level of competence. Ooh, child, this is rough. This is rough. It roughly measures ability that ought to be found in an average of, oh my God, child. It roughly measures ability that ought to be found in an average 7th or 8th grade student. A grown young man who cannot pass this test is in trouble. That hits hard, family. That hits hard. So you're talking 17-year-olds and above trying to take the armed forces test, and they couldn't even pass it. And the test comprehension is at a 7th or 8th grade level. This is deep. And why I pause, because I remember, back when I was 17, 18, some men who couldn't pass that test. Literally. I mean, I didn't know what the test was about, or I didn't know. I thought maybe it had some like entry-level college stuff, or maybe last year's high school stuff when they weren't really paying attention. This is deep. Let's continue. 56% of blacks fail it. This is a rate almost 4 times that of whites. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines conduct by far the largest and most important education and training activities of the federal government, as well as provide the largest single source of employment in the nation. Juvenile delinquents, Philadelphia, by presence of parents. So this is 1949 and 1954. Okay, so that's going over the one delinquency paragraph that they were talking about. So the number of cases out of all court cases, we're going to round up again, 21,000. First offenders for whites, 13,000. Offending again, so doing the crap again, 4,600. For blacks, all court cases, 23,000, so a hair higher. First offenders, okay, a little lower there, not by that much now. 11,000. Doing the crap again, recidivists. Y'all know my country tongue, so I'm just gonna say doing the crap again. For blacks, 6,600. Okay, so across the board, between first offenders, all court cases, and doing the crap the same, blacks led the highest with every category but first offenders. So they get deeper into the data, not living with both parents. For whites, 7,400. And out of the whites for first times of offenders, 4,100. Doing the crap again, 2,000. For blacks, not living with both parents, 14,000. First time offenders, this data tells it. Here it is. First time offenders, 6,500. Doing the crap again, 4,200. Wow. So those living without both, not living with both parents. Wait, number not living with both parents. Yeah, I'm right. Those not living with both parents, as you can see, is higher across the board. I'm trying to read it. Bear with me, y'all. I'm trying to make sure I don't want to lie upon these numbers, the interpretation of these numbers. Okay. Well, it's higher definitely for not living with both parents, black among white. Higher for first-time offenders. That's where I was trying to go. Whereas with number of cases, it was lower. Okay, so this right here shows you, again, the higher impact, the impact, rather, of not having a two-parent household. Okay, and I'm fast-forwarding it up to make it, I'm putting the disclaimer in here that having a two-parent household, we're talking a healthy two-parent household, and also we're talking fathers being actively involved in their children's lives. Now, although that's not what this data is talking about, I'm going to keep saying that because there's really no excuse. Just because you're not married to the person, or just because you're not physically in the household with your family, is your lack of not being actively involved in your child's life. Okay. All right. And then repeat offense, or doing the same crap over again. All right. So this is the part, percent not living with both parents. This is the part that they gave us in the paragraph. For all court cases, for whites was 36%. For blacks, 62%. First-time offenders for whites, 31%. First-time offenders for blacks, 58%. Repeat offenders for whites, 44%. Repeat offenders for blacks, 65%. Now remember, percent not living with both parents. Okay? So again, this data is not comprised on the impact of outside forces outside of the black community. This is truly based on the family structure and the family dynamics. And when you get down to the root of the family structure and the family dynamics in black families, it is the absentee of black fathers. Oh, child, this one is hard. Almost 4 times as many blacks as white fail the armed forces mental test. So they're just giving you the percentage. Okay, so you got about a little bit over 20% overall. For whites, it's about 15%. For blacks, over 50%, probably 56, 57%. Oh, do they break it down? Oh, okay, they're just breaking it down by the different areas. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so what's the percentage in Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont? For whites, it's about 25%. For blacks, right at 50%. Now, we're talking about folks that could not pass the armed forces test, which is based on a comprehension grade level of 7th and 8th graders. Right, so here's the other states where folks could not pass that test. Delaware, DC, Kentucky, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia. Okay, so for whites, probably about 15%. For blacks, about at 45%. Let's get into the other states of where they could not pass. Men could not pass the Army's competency test, which is at a comprehensive level of 7th and 8th graders. Now, this is in the states of Alabama, Florida, Georgia. Oh, my God, y'all. My nerves are straight up bad. Just glanced over a little bit at this, child. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, child. Woo! For whites, a little bit under 20%. Oh, my God, child. For blacks, this looks like 68%, family. So almost 70%. All right, here are the other states: Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. For whites, a little bit over 10%. For blacks, about 63, 64%. Let's look at the other areas. Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Wyoming. Okay, now I can see down here. Under 10% for whites. For blacks, about 45%. The last of the states: Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. For whites, a little bit over 10%. For blacks, a little bit over 30%. All right. Let me get a sip of water. Military service is disruptive in some respects. For those comparatively few who are killed or wounded in combat or otherwise, the personal sacrifice is inestimable. But on balance, service in the armed forces over the past quarter century has worked greatly to the advantages of those involved. The training and experience of military duty itself is unique. The advantages that have generally followed in the form of the GI Bill, mortgage guarantees, federal life insurance, civil service preference, veterans hospitals, and veterans pensions are singular to say the least. Okay, so basically they're saying that military service, you're taking a risk, okay? Because of course, if you are sent to war, that means you are literally, your life is literally on the line. You're literally fighting for your life, okay? But to have a military career, besides that heavy risk, of course, the risk with your life, there's also a lot of benefits, okay? The ability to get a mortgage, great life insurance, medical as well, etc., etc. Which is why in the Black community, now I don't know if that's still heavily pushed like it was. I know when I was coming out of high school, for those that didn't want to go to college, they went to the military. Okay, right? And some folks I know are they made a career out of it, or they retired from it, which they are able to retire well and retire earlier than those that worked as a civilian or worked a regular job. Okay, so I don't know. I can't speak on if today the military is still used as an option for young Black children as a career. Although service in the armed forces is at least nominally a duty of all male citizens coming of age, it is clear that the present system does not enable Negroes to serve in anything like their proportionate numbers. This is not a question of discrimination. Induction into the armed forces is based on a variety of objective tests and standards, but these tests nonetheless have the effect of keeping the number of Negro disproportionately small. Okay, so in other words, if you can't pass the test, you can't get into the service. Okay, now I'll have to ask, but I think that depending on what branch you're going to, that if depending on your test scores, if they're really high, and number one, let me preference it two ways. I'm not sure today if that competency test or comprehension test, military test, I'm not sure if it's still based on a comprehensive level, grade level of 7th and 8th grade. I don't know that for sure as it stands today. Remember, this data is from 63. Okay. I'm just wanted to add that I have heard, based on people that's in the military recently, that based on how you score on those tests, also determines you can come in at a higher rank. So meaning if you score pretty high on the test, you can come in as a higher rank. And definitely if you have college credit, that can also be put towards a higher rank. Okay, so in other words, the military does place educational aptitude as a high standard. So it's not all about being able to be physically strong and follow orders and all of that. They do place comprehensive and cognitive skills as well as a high value. In 1963, the United States Commission on Civil Rights reported that a decade ago, Blacks constituted 8% of the armed forces. Today, they continue to constitute 8% of the armed forces. Okay, so that would be interesting to see what is the percentage today. And we're going to do a follow-up after we finish this series and pull some updated stats. In 1964, Negroes constituted 11% of the population, but remained at 8% of the armed forces. Enlisted men, Army, Black men percentage, 12%. The Navy, 5%. Air Force, 9%. Marines, 8%. Okay. Officers. Army, 3%. Navy, 0.2%. Now, I don't know how true this is, military folk. Y'all can let me know, but I was told that the Navy has the most difficult testing standards. Okay. Now, that's what I was told. I don't know that for sure. Air Force, 1.2. So this is Black officers within these armed forces. The Marines, 0.2. Okay. All right. So you military folks, y'all can argue amongst each other on which one's the best, because I know y'all like to do that. Because Marines, y'all a hot mess. That I do know. Y'all always talking about how big and bad you all are. But anyhow, the significance of Blacks underrepresented representation in the armed forces is greater than might at first be supposed. If Blacks were represented in the same proportion in the military as they are in the population, they would be number 300,000 plus. This would be over 100,000 more than at present using a 1964 strength figures. If more than 100,000 unemployment, I figured this is where they were going to go with this. If the more than 100,000 unemployed Negro men were to have gone into the military, the Negro male unemployment rate would have been 7% in 1964 instead of 9.1%. In 1963, the Civil Rights Commission commented on the occupational aspect of military service for Blacks. Negro enlisted men enjoy relatively better opportunities in the armed forces than in the civilian economy in every clerical, technical, and skill field for which the data permits comparison. So, what they're pretty much saying is to combat the unemployment rate among Black men, that the military, having a career in military is a great option, all right? Now, I know when I was coming up out of high school, you had the armed forces come into the high schools recruiting. And that was just pretty much an unwritten rule in some Black households. Now, in some, again, it's depending on that family structure. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to college? Okay, if college is not your thing, or you can't get into college because of grades or whatever, the other option was military. Okay, because by the time I was coming up out of high school, it was no longer, oh, well, you can go to work at the plant with your dad or whatever, because those jobs were being shipped overseas. Okay, but folks that went in the military, and especially those that made a career out of military, had steady employment and were getting paid more than they would have been getting paid, and we're talking Black men, than if they stayed a civilian. Okay. Now, being in tech myself, I can tell you that a lot of Black men that were in tech, which were not, it's still not many, they came from the military. So they were taught their technical skills from the military, or once they were in the military, they used the military benefits to go to school and were able to come into the tech realm. Okay. All right, so let's move on. There is, however, an even more important issue involved in military service for Negroes or Blacks. Service in the United States Armed Forces is the only experience open to the Black American in which he is truly treated as an equal, not as a Black equal to a white, but as one man equal to another man in a world where the category Negro and white do not exist. If this is a statement of the idea rather than the reality, it is an idea that is close to realization. In food, dress, housing, pay, work, the Negro in the armed forces is equal and is treated that way. Okay. There is another special quality about military service for Black men. It is an utterly masculine world. Given the strains of the disorganized and matrifocal family life in which so many Black youth came of age, the armed forces are a dramatic and desperately needed change. A world away from women, a world run by strong men of unquestioned authority, where discipline, if harsh, is nonetheless orderly and predictable, and where rewards, if limited, are granted on the basis of performance. All right, so let me take a sip of water. Because, of course, that's their Army recruiting thing, whatever. But I can't speak to the generation, the millennials. I can't speak for the millennials. I can't speak for the Zs, the generation after the millennial. I can only speak for Generation X and some of the baby boomer generation, and only those that I have come into contact with. I often hear men say that the military service made a man out of them. Okay, so that's interesting. Although, to me, they putting a little plug up in here. But I find it interesting that they are equating how it is such a benefit to Black men because it is a masculine world. And they're able to, get away from a world from women. Okay, so meaning if the Black community is a matriarch, and it is a matriarch because of the absence of Black fathers, then that means that Black boys are just in the world of women, and women trying to operate solely on her own in a patriarch system. So Black boys are not getting to see the benefits of manhood. Okay? So that would be something new to a Black man who maybe grew up around a lot of women, didn't have any male type of role model, father wasn't present. That would be something totally new to him. Okay, now again, I cannot speak for the millennials. I can't speak for the newer generations. I can only speak from what folk have told me in my generation and some of the elders in the baby boomers. From a Black man perspective, what the military did for them. All right. Okay, now let's be clear. I'm not advocating military service or any of that. It doesn't matter what I think about it. I'm just giving you the stats. Okay. The theme of a current Army recruiting message states it is as clearly as can be. In the U.S. Army, you get to know what it means to feel like a man. Okay, so again, that's their plug. But I can't tell nobody what they feel. All right, so if that's how Black men felt, that's how they felt. Okay. At the recent Civil Rights Commission hearing in Mississippi, a witness testified that his Army service was, in fact, the only time I ever felt like a man. Yet, a majority of Negro youth and probably 3/4 of Mississippi Negroes who fail the selective service education tests are rejected. Negro participation in the armed forces would be less than it is were it not for a proportionately larger share of voluntary enlistments and re-enlistments. Oh, interesting. Thus, 16.3% of Army sergeants are Black. Okay, so let me take a sip. So there you have it, family, on the military service part. This particular stats are not only going over it as an alternative, as a career, so meaning an alternative in order to have steady income, benefits, the ability to take care of family. They also went into the psychology behind it of Black men, what they were not getting as Black boys, which was the presence of a man. They were able to get it in the armed forces. Okay. But they also wanted to put in here that a lot of the Black men could not even qualify to get into the services because of the comprehension. So not being able to pass the entry-level exam for the armed services. Now, remember, this was back in 1963 of a 7th and 8th grade comprehension. All right. Alienation. The term alienation may by now have been used in too many ways to retain a clear meaning, but it will serve to sum up the equally numerous ways in which large number of Negro youth appear to be withdrawing from American society. One startling way in which this occurs is that the men are just not there when the census enumerator comes around. According to the Bureau of Census Population estimates for 1963, there are only 87 Black males for every 100 females in the 30 to 34 year age group. The ratio does not exceed 90 to 100% throughout the 25 to 44 year age bracket. In the urban Northeast, there are only 76 males per 100 females 20 to 24 years of age, and males as a percentage of the females are below 90% throughout all ages after 14. Excuse me. There are not really fewer men than women in the 20 to 40 age bracket. What obviously is involved is an error in counting. The surveyors simply do not find the Negro man. Donald J. Boogie and his associates, who have studied the federal count of the Negro man, placed the error as high as 20% at age 28. A typical error around 15% is estimated from age 19 through 43. Preliminary research in the Bureau of the Census on the 1960 enumeration has resulted in similar conclusions, although not necessarily the same estimates of the extent of the error. The Negro male can be found at age 17 and 18 on the basis of birth records and mortality records. Okay, that makes sense. The conclusion must be that he is there at age 19 as well. When the enumerators do find him, his answers to the standard questions asked in the monthly unemployment survey often result in counting him as not in the labor force. In other words, Negro male unemployment may in truth be somewhat greater than reported. Child. The labor force participation rates of Black men have been falling since the beginning of the century, and for the past decade have been lower than the rates for white men. In 1964, the participation rates were 78% for white men and 75% for Black men. Almost 1 percentage point of this difference was due to a higher proportion of Black men unable to work because of long-term physical or mental illness. It seems reasonable to assume that the rest of the difference is due to discouragement about finding a job. If Black male labor force participation rates were as high as white rates, there would have been 140,000 more Black males in the labor force in 1964. If we further assume that 140,000 would have been unemployed, the unemployment rate for Black men would have been 11.5% instead of the recorded rate of 9%. And the ratio between the Black rate and the white rate would have jumped from 2.1 to 2.4. Understated or not, the official unemployment rate for Blacks are almost unbelievable. The unemployment statistics for Black teenagers, 29% in January 1965, reflect lack of training and opportunity in the greatest measure, but it may not be doubted that they also reflect a certain failure of nerve. Are you looking for a job? Secretary of Labor Wirtz asked a young man on a Harlem street corner. Why? Was the reply. Richard A. Cloward and Robert Ontel have commented on this withdrawal in a discussion of the mobilization for youth projects on the Lower East Side of New York. What contemporary slum and minority youth probably lack that similar children in earlier periods possess is not motivation, but some minimum sense of competence. All right. So let me pause a second. Let's reflect. So if Black boys are struggling in school, and we know that they were, this was based on the statistics, and we know why they were struggling. It all goes back to the family, the Black family structure, and the root cause of that family structure is the absentee of Black fathers in the household. That means what type of job can Black boys or teenagers get who ultimately turn into Black men if they do not have a comprehension aptitude? Okay. So could that motivation, that discouragement from these Black boys or Black teenage boys that they are talking to in the urban communities, based on the types of jobs that they would qualify for, they would get? All right. What contemporary slum and minority youth probably lack that similar children in earlier periods possess is not motivation, but some minimum sense of competence. Okay. So what type of job can they get based on their education level, or their aptitude, their skill set level, or their comprehension. Now, remember, in the study, it also talked about how when you have fathers in the household, that fathers, whatever the father does for a living, more than likely the son is going to do for a living. So that means, let's say the father is a plumber, the father works in construction, more than likely that's what the son is going to grow up to do as well. Because there's that teaching by the father, there's that grooming by the father. But if you don't have that father around to teach those skills, so not only are Black boys falling behind in school from a comprehension level, they also lack the skills of being builders, or if you want to say carpentry, those type of skills as well. Okay, because everybody doesn't have to be a bookworm. Okay, now absolutely you should have basic comprehension skills. Absolutely that you should. Okay, absolutely you should have a healthy cognitive skills. Absolutely. But not everybody has to go to college to have, a white collar job. They can be just as successful as they're calling it carpentry jobs. So those plumbers, okay, and those other types of jobs, constructions, et cetera, et cetera. So Black men lag behind in that as well. We are plagued and work with these youth by what appears to be low tolerance for frustration. They are not able to absorb setbacks. Minor irritants and rebuffs are magnified out of all proportions to reality. Perhaps they react as they do because they are not equal to the world that confronts them and they know it. That's deep, y'all. So in other words, if you fall down, it's like, just forget it. Just forget it. I tried. See, this is what happens when you as a Black person, you as a Black man try to do something, you just get knocked down. Just forget it. They don't want us as equal. We're not equal anyway. Have we heard that narrative before? But let's continue. And it is, the knowing that is devastating. So that is a pathology. If you feel that you are less than, that is a pathology. If you feel you are less than, that is a pathology. And that is a dangerous pathology. Had the occupational structure remained intact, or had the education provided them to keep pace with occupational changes, the situation would be a different one. But it is not. And that is what we and they have to contend with. So we already talked about that. If you don't have the education, if you were not taught a trade or a skill that did not require higher level education where you can go get a white collar job, you don't have the skill to be the plumber, the construction workers, etc. You can't compete. You literally cannot compete. So as a black boy, if you are growing up without a father, how is that weighing on black boys' psyche when they compare themselves as a black boy to the rest of the world? And then when they step, and so not only that, just the psyche alone. And as they're navigating through their childhood, they're not able to cope with the education system. And then not only not able to cope, or let's just say they just really don't like school, they are not giving a skill for survival when they step into manhood. Tell me, how can they compete? They can't. How can they sustain a family? They can't. How can they even sustain themselves? They can't. And thus the cycle continues. They have children, but because of their conditions, being not able to compete in the world to take care of self, take care of family, he abandons, withdraws from the family. And so you have yet another generation growing up in a household without black fathers. What does that do on the psyche of a child? When you compare yourself to others and what you have is way, way less or even non-existent. What does that do to a black man's psyche when he compares himself to other men? When he cannot compete, when he cannot sustain a family, when he cannot even sustain himself. See, these are the conversations that we should be having. These are the honest conversations that we should be having. Let's continue. Narcotic addiction is a characteristic form of withdrawal. In 1963, Negroes made up 54% of the addicted population of the United States. Although the Federal Bureau of Narcotics reports a decline in black proportion of new addicts, HARU reports the addiction rate in Central Harlem rose from 22 per 10,000 in 1955 to 40% in 1961. Okay. So now we all know we can go a little bit behind these numbers based on what we know today on how drugs flow through the U.S. and how particularly how they get over to black communities. Whew, y'all, this is deep. It's just layers upon layers upon layers. Okay? Right? So, of course, the drug cartels are not black melanated people. We know today that the drugs were orchestrated by actually being smuggled by the military, okay? But the individual pushers in the neighborhoods are Black men. Okay? So folks were using drugs overwhelmingly as a form of withdrawal. Okay? So we know when folks are addicts and they need their drugs, then hence there comes the crime. Okay? So I'm not going to go into the whole drug thing because that's a separate conversation itself. It's a deep one. But in this report, they're just giving you that drugs and drug addiction are used as a form of withdrawal. Okay. But I just wanted to put that notation out there because even the topic of drugs and drug addiction in the Black community, that's a separate conversation within itself. Okay. So there is a larger fact about the alienation of Black youth than the tangle of pathology described by these statistics. It is a fact particularly difficult to grasp by white persons who have in recent years shown increasingly awareness of Black problems. The present generation of Black youth growing up in the urban ghettos has probably less personal contact with the white world than any generation in the history of Black America. Okay, that makes sense. And I'm going to say that still rings true today. Until World War II, it could be said that in general, the Black and white worlds lived, if not together, at least side by side. Now let me sip my water. Because see, those of us that research history, I'll not only research history, his story of what he told us, but also research the accuracy of what really happened. We know without a shadow of a doubt that this is true. Until World War II, it could be said that in general, the Black and white worlds lived together. The Black and white worlds lived, if not together, at least side by side. Certainly they did and do in the South. Mm-hmm. If you know the accuracy of history, you know that to be true. Okay? Since World War II, however, the two worlds have drawn physically apart. The symbol of this development was the construction in the 1940s and 50s of the vast white middle and lower middle class suburbs around all the nation's cities. Increasingly, the inner cities have been left to the Blacks, who now share almost no community life with whites. All right? It should be no surprise. But those of you of the younger generation, now you know. And they call that the Great White Flight. So meaning white folks leaving up out of the cities into what we're now calling today the suburbs. In turn, because of this new housing pattern, most of which has been financially assisted by the federal government, it is probable that the American school system has become more rather than less segregated in the past 2 decades. Okay, yep. All right, so they're giving you, this chart is just showing you the rate of narcotic users in central Harlem was 8 times as high as that for New York City in 1961. Okay, so you can see those stats. All right. Although we know that back then Harlem, and Harlem is associated with being Black. Although gentrification has happened in Harlem. All right. Okay. School integration has not occurred in the South, where a decade after Brown versus Board of Education, only 1 Negro in 9 is attending school with white children. And in the North, despite strenuous official efforts, neighborhoods and therefore schools are becoming more and more of one class and one color. Okay, so that's based on where folks live. Okay, which is also why I talked about, may have been in the third episode of this series, on the difference of the quality of education in Black neighborhoods, urban versus white neighborhoods. Okay. In New York, and not that whites are smarter, it's because of the resources given to the schools, and the resources given to the schools are based on tax dollars. So if you have more homeowners with a higher value on their home, the higher the taxes are, the more dollars being funded to those schools. And to add gasoline to that fire, with the white population having fathers in the home versus the Black population not having fathers in the home, and lack of resources all around, from the family perspective as well as from education. In New York City, in the school year 1957 and 58, there were 64 schools that were 90% or more Negro or Puerto Rican. 6 years later, there were 134 such schools. Along with the diminution of white middle class contacts for a larger percentage Negroes, observers report that the Negro churches have all but lost contact with men in the north. Am I missing something? In the northern city as well. What does the church got to do with that? Okay, I don't know. All right, let me keep reading. This may be a normal condition of urban life, but it is probably a changed condition for the Negro American and cannot be socially desirable development. Okay, so I guess they're just saying in this case that up north, Black men don't go to church as much as they do in the South. Sorry about that, family. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about. The only religious movement that appears to have enlisted a considerable number of lower class Negro males in northern cities of late. Oh, child. Let me pause a second. Child. I apologize, family. Child. Woo, baby, let me reread that. Here we go. The only religious movement that appears to have enlisted a considerable number of lower class Negro males in northern cities of late is that of the Black Muslims, a movement based on total rejection of white society, even though it emulates. Ooh, child, let me clutch pearls. Was that shade, or are y'all gonna get some stats to this? Let me sip this water. Baby, that's shade. Whew. The only religious movement that appears to have enlisted a considerable number of lower class Negro males in northern cities of late is that of the Black Muslims, a movement based on total rejection of white society, even though it emulates whites more. In a word, the tangle of pathology is tightening. Okay, we're going to stop there. Ciao. We're going to finish this up with the case for national action. Whew, Ciao. Let me just reiterate once again why I am doing this particular series. I'm doing this series to show with statistics the root reasons of why the Black families are in the state that they are in. I am doing this series for the Black collective to use this information and have honest conversations. Okay? I am doing this series for Black families to take this information and have honest conversations. I am doing this series for Black men to have honest conversations. Again, Black men, you do not have to have these conversations with women. Have them among yourselves, but have them honestly. In order for the survival of not only the Black community, Black families, it has to be corrected. The ills that are suffered, we're talking for decades, they have to be corrected. We are at extinction levels. We are at the point of when Black children are being birthed into the world. They are literally being birthed into situations that are really warlike. And that is based on the environment they are in, that is based on the family dynamics and structure, which the root cause is no Black father in the household, lack of resources, grim future based on lack of education, lack of preparedness for skill set. Again, I am doing this series for the purpose of having honest conversations discussing the root issues. The Black community, the Black family are at extinction levels. Black community, Black families as a collective are birthing children into a world of war-like conditions. So I will leave the link to this report in the description. We will be back with a part 5. We'll probably probably should be the last one. It depends on how big this section is, and this is going to be the case for national action. Thank you for being patient with me, family. This is Rhonda with WTUZ Radio Podcast. Peace and love.